ZiiGaat has absolutely exploded onto the scene recently, getting a bunch of traction for their collab IEMs and just from reviewers in general. But which of their offerings is best for you? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. Hey everybody, I'm Matthew from Bloom Audio, and today we have 6 different ZiiGaat IEMs to take a look at and deep dive a little bit further into. What originally started as just reviewing the Arcadia kind of morphed into doing their whole lineup. So here we are. We got a bunch of these IEMs to check out. We're going to take a look at their sound from a subjective and objective perspective. We're going to talk about what I like and don't like about these IEMs, and hopefully inch you a little bit closer to a buying decision. So let's not waste any time. Let's just get into a general overview of their build and design. To kick things off, I'm not really getting us off on the right step. I actually think ZiiGaat needs to do a little bit more to improve their unboxing experience. The cable here, well, it isn't great. It can get tangled at times. Most of these come in 3.5. You do have the option with the Doscinco and Cincotres to get the 4.4 option if you like a balanced connection. But for the most part, it's just really not a great cable. I think where my biggest problem lies is actually the traveling case. I do not like this case at all. The edges can sometimes get stuck with the zipper. So that whole experience, I'm not gonna say it's really that great. Don't expect too much here in the unboxing. Now with that out of the way, I do wanna say that their faceplate designs are actually quite good. Especially on the collab IEMs, I think ZiiGaat does a good job of creating something that's both appealing to the eye without being too gaudy or overdone. There's a captivating sense here in their faceplate designs without just being too much. As for fit and comfort, I think ZiiGaat IEMs do a great job of sealing in my ear. I used my Baroque medium tips on these as I felt that they did the nozzle the best. They didn't really congest anything and they opened up that bass response a lot. When I actually first heard ZiiGaat in Can Jam SoCal, I actually didn't like these IEMs at all. I tried them with the SpinFit Omni, as that is usually my go-to tip for each and every IEM I listen to, and I didn't like them. I thought they just sounded thin and choked. And then I went to the L-Tech Baroques and it absolutely changed the game for them. And once I got them here for evaluation, I used the Baroque exclusively and just absolutely loved how it sounded with these IEMs. Now we can finally dive into our first IEM and take a closer look at the Arcadia, a collab between ZiiGaat and HBB. Arcadia comes in at $199. It features 1 dynamic driver and 2 balanced armatures. HBB at this point in time probably doesn't need any introduction. He has so many different collab IEMs at this point with the Kiwi Ears Punch, the Fat Freak Deuce, now Arcadia, and others with 7 Hertz, and yeah, he's everywhere. Arcadia follows HBB's tuning target basically to a T. This is the closest a collab IEM of his has come to his target, so if you've used his target for EQ or have just liked how it graphs, I really don't have any hesitations for you to take a closer look at Arcadia because this IEM is pretty much that target here. If you know HBB and his music collection, you won't be surprised to hear that Arcadia does really well with hip hop. It has a very tight rhythm section, does great with rock and roll. The vocals on this IEM are definitely its mainstay and its biggest captivating characteristic in its sound signature. Just looking at the graph here, if you pulled up his tuning target and compared it, which he did in the video he did of Arcadia, you would just see how close it comes. You get a nice bass response, a very clean mid-range that I think is represented a lot in all of these ZiiGaat IEMs. Arcadia, no different. Those vocals take a little bit of precedent in the sound signature, come across very clean, well articulate, not too forward, not too recessed, just really well captured. Finishing up with the treble, I've kind of come to expect this with HBB tunings. There's really not too much air or brilliance here. It rolls off rather quick. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we dissect this IEM further. Now, what do I like about Arcadia? Well, it's those vocals I just mentioned that I think HBB does a great job of implementing in each and every one of his collab IEMs. Plain and simple, I think HBB just has a really great ear for vocals. I think each and every one of his tunings that I've listened to that he's influenced, there is just this sense of naturalness with these vocals. They have great weight and body to them, and they're just so well captured in the mix, and I really just couldn't get enough of them in Arcadia. Each and every time I went to listen to Arcadia, I was just kind of taken back at the vocal performance. I thought at $200, there may not be a better IEM to present these vocals in such a way that are just captured very well. And I think if you are someone that likes very lively and engaging vocals, I don't think Arcadia is really going to let you down. Now, what do I not like about Arcadia? I think this is one that I could do for a little bit more treble detail with. I think there's just that smooth nature that, yeah, maybe if you got something brighter here, if you got something more piercing, it would just be fatiguing and it really wouldn't sound all that great. But I do kind of wish Arcadia took a little bit more risk. I wish there was a little bit more splash with treble crashes. There was just a little bit more air with instruments like brass that were just portrayed in the mix. But for the most part, I think this is a slight nitpick just because, again, if you tune something too bright and it's piercing, you're not really going to want to listen to it for a while. Maybe Arcadia could have been too fatiguing with those more forward vocals and a treble that's a little bit brighter. So yeah, maybe a slight nitpick, but I definitely could have gone for a little bit more treble detail. Now moving into Odyssey. This one is $229 and it features a dynamic driver and 3 balanced armatures. Odyssey is set to take you on a musical journey. I think it does that quite well. It has a pretty safe and musical tuning that I think a lot of people are going to like here. It doesn't take too much risk. There's really great tonality here. There's some slight coloration in the mid-range. There's okay treble presence, pretty smooth for the most part. I think that helps with its non-fatiguing nature. So if you're into all those kind of things, I think Odyssey might be a really good pick. Starting off with the bass, I think Odyssey does a good job of implementing a bass response that's upbeat. It's present, it has a nice sense of engagement, but it's not overdone by any means. There's no large bass shelf. This is not a bass monster. There's just enough there to pair well with a lot of different genres. Hip hop and rap, they have that nice up-tempo sense of hit in the bass response without really it being overdone or bleeding into the other bodies of music. It definitely does not do that. As for the mids, you definitely get a slightly colored mid-range response here, but it remains pretty clean, pretty natural. The vocals aren't too pushed back. They're not too forward. They're pretty well implemented. They have nice vocal presence. I wouldn't say if you're a vocal head or anything like that, you're going to love these vocals, but they do have nice presence there. And this is just a mid-range that I think has that slight coloration to kind of keep up that tonality and musicality that Odyssey's going for. So it definitely has nice presence and coloration to it. As for the treble, I think you get slightly more air and detail than Arcadia, but for the most part, this is still a very smooth listen. This is one, like I keep saying, that keeps tonality and musicality at the forefront, and I can't emphasize that enough. This is quite a smooth treble response that doesn't take too much risk. So if you're looking for that, Odyssey is not looking to deliver that for you. What I like about Odyssey is kind of what I just talked about in objective sound. There's really not too much risk here. It's a very inoffensive, it's a very safe tuning. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't want to knock on it. I think in multiple different listening sessions, I just threw these on and I enjoyed my music. I could listen to any genre I really wanted, and Odyssey presented it in a very engaging and slightly emotional way. That slight coloration in the mids I talked about kind of kept that emotion up in its sound signature, and every listening session I had, I just threw these on and I enjoyed it. I could play my entire library and nothing came across as piercing or sharp. Everything just had nice emotion, and it just made for a captivating listen that I kind of wanted to go back to with Odyssey. And as for what I don't like, to play devil's advocate, there really isn't a defining characteristic here. Yeah, it's safe and it's well tuned. That's great, but I think in a collection of different IEMs, this one may get lost in a vast majority of different IEMs that do things really well. There's IEMs that just nail treble. There's IEMs that excel in its bass response or just have a very clean or warm mid-range that really just separates it from the pack, and Odyssey can sometimes get a little left behind in that regard. I don't think I'd reach into the demo cabinet and say, oh wow, Odyssey, I gotta have this IEM, I gotta listen to this IEM for this genre, or this is gonna sound great with this song or this pairing of sources. There's nothing really like that here. I just think if you're a collector of IEMs from multiple different years, you've been in this hobby for a while, Odyssey may not stick out too much in your collection, but I also don't think you're gonna buy it and be disappointed. It's going to present everything in your music just good, and that's good. Now moving on to Arete. This is a $249 IEM. It's got 1 dynamic driver and 4 balanced armatures, and it is a collab between YouTube reviewer Fresh Reviews and ZiiGaat. Fresh Reviews is a very popular YouTube reviewer who does IEM reviews as well as other gaming accessory coverage. He was a former professional Counter-Strike player and still plays games relatively competitively. When he does IEM reviews, I always look forward to seeing how he details an IEM's sense of spacing and imaging to help in competitive games. I'm not a competitive gamer by any means, but it's cool to see his perspective. I think he offers something a lot different than most reviewers can in his sense of detailing how IEMs sound in gaming. So if you're into that kind of thing, I definitely recommend go checking him out. This IEM was tuned for Apex Legends and Call of Duty in mind, and just general competitive gaming as a forefront for its sound signature. As for the graph here, you get a good amount of bass, definitely not too much here. You don't want anything congesting that mid-range when you're competitively gaming. You don't want a grenade going off and it just completely removing any sense of spacing and imaging with the footsteps and anything like that. So you get a pretty good bass response. It's got a decently lively nature to it there in the low end, but not anything to write home about. The bass quantity isn't too great, where the bass quality is pretty good. Mid-range, again, pretty clean here. Definitely want to keep that not congested, want to keep that very well articulated. I think Arete does a really good job of that. As for the upper mids and transitioning into the treble, this is where I think most of the tuning focus went into, and this gives off a very large sound stage for this IEM, and that's a great thing if you're into that, and it really helps with gaming. So that is definitely where I think almost all of the attention was focused on. Treble is definitely not bright, a little bit recessed, I think, just to have that non-fatiguing nature to it and to just be able to really focus in again on those footsteps in gaming. So yeah, don't expect too much treble brilliance here with Arete. So what do I like about Arete? I just enjoy how clean it is. It has a very nice mid-range to it. It extends in the low frequencies and high frequencies pretty well, and it just has really nice accuracy to it in the soundstage and imaging. The width and verticality just sound natural and well articulated, again, just in a way that was pretty captivating in my music listening. So what do I not like about Arete? Well, I feel like I'm not really getting what this IEM has to offer completely until I use it for online or competitive gaming. I can really appreciate what Fresh Reviews has done for the gaming community in making this IEM, but until I'm really taking full advantage of this IEM, I just feel like for music listening, it didn't excel too much for me where I had to own it, and unless I'm competitively gaming, I'm really just not getting the full value out of this IEM. Again, that's what I don't like about this IEM. If you feel like you could really take advantage of it, and this one could be a mainstay in your gaming collection, I highly recommend you check this one out, because again, Fresh Reviews does a great job in depicting IEM's sense of spacing and imaging, and I think you'll probably really enjoy this one for competitive gaming. Moving on to Doscinco, this IEM comes in at $269. It has 2 dynamic drivers and 3 balanced armatures, and it looks to deliver a pretty bassy sound signature. Starting off with the bass, there it is. I mean, that 10 dB bass shelf is no joke. You can hear it, you can enjoy it. It's got nice snap and crack to it. It's really good bass response, both in its quantity and quality presented. So if you like bass, you're probably going to like Doscinco. Moving into the mid-range, you may have some slight bleed into those mids there, but I think for the most part, with the amount of bass you get here, there isn't too much congestion in that mid-range. Moving into those upper mids, you get pretty nice vocal performance here, though I would have opted for a little bit more weight in those vocals. Kind of what Arcadia has, I kind of wish transitioned here into Doscinco, but we'll talk about that a little bit more as we dissect this IEM further. As for the treble, you get some pretty nice detail, some pretty nice air and brilliance here. There's some nice splash to cymbal crashes. I think this is where ZiiGaat kind of separated Doscinco from those other IEMs in the sense of how it portrays treble. You get a really nice bass response. I think you get really nice treble here with Doscinco. So what do I like about this IEM? Plain and simple, I really like its bass response. I think the 10 dB bass shelf just has some really nice presence to its sub bass. It bounces. It has pretty good slam and crack to it in the mid bass, and just has a really upbeat sense to it. For the most part, I think you get a pretty well-balanced sound signature. I think this is one that I could recommend to a lot of people, and they pretty much just enjoy it. It has really nice sense of engagement to it. It's still got a good amount of detail. Vocals aren't too smothered by that bass response or treble detail, so there's pretty nice presence there. And overall, Doscinco just has a pretty enjoyable sound signature for the most part. So what do I personally not like about Doscinco? Well, to play devil's advocate yet again, I don't really need anything too bassy anymore in my collection. I have that pretty much covered with the 64 Audio Neo, and more importantly by the Fat Freak Deuce that I did end up picking up. And I think this one is just outclassed by those two IEMs in specific, and I would need something a little bit more in Doscinco to really justify its purchase. Although if you don't have those two in your collection, or you don't really have anything too bassy in your collection, I think Doscinco could really fill in a nice gap for you, and is just an all-around pretty darn good IEM. Moving on, we have the Cincotres coming in at $269. You get the 2 dynamic drivers and 3 balanced armatures here. It's looking to deliver a studio monitor-like performance, but you get a lot of mid-bass here that I think a lot of IEMs miss out on, and this was definitely a welcome surprise for me as someone who loves mid-bass. So this was an IEM that just kind of naturally clicked with me in my listening sessions. Looking at the frequency response graph here, we have the sub-bass and mid-bass following pretty close to each other, and that's just something I really enjoyed in the sound signature. I think ZiiGaat did a really good job of finding the right balance of sub-bass and mid-bass, and just did a good job in delivering a bass response that's very engaging, captivating, and different from what I've listened to in this price bracket in particular. The mid-range does its best in delivering something that is unbothered and unoccupied by that bass response. When you have a lot of mid-bass, you definitely don't want it to encroach in those mids. I think ZiiGaat, for the most part, did a pretty good job in delivering that. For the most part, this treble response isn't the most resolving or extended, but I do think there's a good amount of information presented here that you don't really feel like you're missing out on too much in this treble response, and I think it just sets up for a pretty well-balanced and well-presented listen. What I love about this set, as a mid-bass fan, I think Cincotres just knocked it out of the park. I think this is something that I really long for in a lot of IEMs, and this IEM just felt like it delivered it for me. I just felt like I finally had something I could rely on to give me that hit, that crack in the mid-bass, and this IEM really just excelled at that. I would probably say this is actually probably one of ZiiGaat's best offerings, and I think maybe that's just a personal bias in how I like my IEMs and sound signature presented, but if you're anything like me, I think you're really going to like this IEM. I think it presents bass very well. I think the mids and treble are really well articulated, and this is just a very good set all through and through. What I don't like about this IEM is sometimes vocals can come across a bit lean. They lack that body, maybe even that warmth to them that make them very engaging, very captivating. This IEM doesn't really excel in that or do that very well to my ears, but I think for the most part, they are still well represented. They do sound good for the most part, but I think I would have opted for a little bit more weight and body there in the vocals. Last but certainly not least, we have Estrella, a collab between Jay's Audio and ZiiGaat, coming in at $299, featuring 2 dynamic drivers and 4 balanced armatures. Jay's Audio is an IEM reviewer who has a pretty fun personality. I've watched a good amount of his reviews. I think he has an ear that lines up pretty similarly with mine on a lot of his takes. Obviously, I don't agree on every single one of them, but for the most part, I enjoy watching his content, and I was happy to see him get a collab here with ZiiGaat. Estrella is quite energetic, it is quite exciting, and it's not really like most of ZiiGaat's offerings here. I think this one definitely differs the most from their pretty typical house sound. I think all of these have a similar DNA to them, and I think Estrella definitely goes against the grain a little bit in its approach. Looking at the frequency response graph, we get a pretty good bass response. This has a nice thump to it, has a nice sense of engagement, got pretty good sub-bass emphasis, and it transitions quite well into the mids. The mid-range as a whole is pretty good, and in the upper mids, I think there's a little bit of a recession here, and the treble can somewhat take precedent in this mix. I found some reviewers have talked about this IEM being fatiguing. I would chalk that up to the treble response. And yeah, I mean, it's slightly V-shaped, I would say. There is a good amount of sub-bass, there's a good amount of treble detail, and sometimes those vocals can be overtaken by those 2 frequencies. But for the most part, I still think the vocals are pretty well represented. I think this is still a decently well-balanced set that just leans slightly V-shaped. What I really like about this IEM is how it stages. It feels very wide. There's a lot of space in between instruments. I like listening to film scores and orchestras, things like that just really came alive with Estrella. I also liked listening to my more upbeat, hip-hop, rap-focused tracks on this IEM as it was just very fun. It was just energetic. There was just this sense of energy to it that I don't think a lot of other ZiiGaat IEMs had, and this one just really separated itself in that way, just made for a very fun listen. So what do I not like about this IEM? Well, sometimes it could get a little too fun, it could get a little too energetic, and yeah, that slightly fatiguing nature that was talked about with reviewers and some people that just got their hands on this IEM, it did come across as slightly fatiguing on some tracks. And I think that's just kind of the nature of a sound signature like this. To my ears, I thought for 85% of my tracks, it just sounded great. It was upbeat, it was energetic, it was lively, and it was fun. But for that 15% of my library that it was too much for, yeah, it had a slight fatiguing sense to it. I do think that's just the nature of a sound signature like this that throws a lot of information at you in the treble. But for the most part, I really did enjoy my listening sessions with Estrella, but do see that perspective of why it could be fatiguing. I don't think that would stop me from recommending it or even owning it myself, but that is something to caution yourself with if you are treble sensitive or just feel like you look at this graph and say, nah, it's not for me. It probably isn't, and I would recommend looking at some other options. So we can't go home without a winner, or more so what I would take home with me if I were to purchase one of these IEMs, and that would be the Cincotres. I think this IEM just did a lot of what I like in a sound signature. I think it presented a lot of good information in the treble. That staging and imaging was really captivating. The mid bass was excellent. I just thought as a whole, this was the IEM that stuck in my ears the most, and I went back to a lot in my listening sessions. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was able to give you a good look at ZiiGaat as a brand and some of the IEMs that they offer. We don't actually carry these IEMs at Bloom, at least just yet. I do have a hunch that sooner rather than later we will be stocking these. So if you want to find out a little bit more about them or when we'll be carrying them, you can hit us up at hello@bloomaudio.com or jump into a live chat. Me and my colleagues are ready and waiting to talk a little bit more about audio with you guys, so feel free to hit us up there. Make sure to leave a comment down below if you want to compare these IEMs to anything else I've heard. I always look forward to connecting with you guys down there. Be sure to like and subscribe, as we'll be back soon with more high fidelity audio content.